even though it's not newly shot.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I was just as excited to watch that video now. It's so well done. You have a background in filmmaking. We'll talk about that in a second. But Kyle, I want to bring you in the conversation. Lay it on me, man. You know, the one thing Chops is all about is the authentic flight experience. How did he do?
To be honest, I was more than impressed with his flying capabilities. And seeing that promo video at the beginning, it's no wonder. He's flown, by the looks of it, just about everything that's out there. There's a few other people that got to fly my plane at Osh 2019, including the F-22 demo pilot Loco and the A-10 demo pilot Shiv. And by far, with those guys and all their experience flying the big jets with the big power, I would say that Chops had the best handle on the plane. He had the best hands and feet for sure.
Wow. I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I could see Chops going, yeah, man, thanks for that. We have someone checking in the chat right now. He goes on Instagram by Home409. He's Eric O'Connor, and he is actually featured in your video, Chops. But for Kyle, help people understand, because he flew your photo ship and was sort of your crew chief during EAA AirVenture.
Yes, he was. He definitely helped us out a lot. What are you wanting to know about the plane, I guess, as far as the handling goes?
Well, so it is and you had a chance also to work with Match, who is a former Canadian snowbird and also an F-18 pilot as well. So to pull this off, it is definitely a tricky sort of, it's a tricky thing. It requires a lot of coordination on a lot of different fronts. Chops, from your perspective, when you were flying something like this, how completely different is it from any other experience? I saw a clip in the video where you're talking about, working the rudder pedals. Tell me how different that is.
Well, besides the fact that the rudder pedals on that airplane are entirely different than anything I've ever experienced, doing a formation flight where we also were doing aerobatics and in a new airplane was a lot. But I knew that both guys in the airplane beside us were fighter pilots and totally knew what they were doing. So I had no concerns about that. But it is worthy of addressing that you don't want to mess around with formation flying. We briefed it, but the fact is I was flying lead and I was still, there was a time where we tried to do knife edge. The guys used the term knife edge. So in my head, I'm like, knife edge. So when we try to do it, it obviously is not possible to do a 90-degree knife edge straight flight in that airplane. So I ended up turning into number 2, which is not what you want to do in formation, but he's so awesome. He kind of knew that might happen. You can see it in the footage. He just goes down and does what you're supposed to do to get out of the way as number 2. And I was stressed immediately. I think you hear me in the video say, I just lost the formation, because I knew that I no longer was holding a straight heading as lead, which isn't what you want to do. But because of the nature of how we planned it and who I was flying with, I knew it wasn't a safety issue. I just felt bad. But it was a good experience to see how, obviously, the airplane does not have much of a tail. Clearly, it's not going to be able to do real knife edge flight. So it was interesting to kind of understand how that worked. And just those types of aspects made that experience really different. And again, knowing that I was flying beside these awesome literal fighter pilots, I knew it wasn't a problem. It was actually funny. There was one moment in the climb where he asked us to pull the power back a bit. So I know in the rocket, it was probably a hard pill to swallow to know you're getting out climbed by this thing.
Kyle, let's bring you in the conversation because he is talking about that knife edge. What are some of the considerations that you have when you do aerobatics in the Long Easy?
Well, the big consideration that I would have flying the Long Easy in any kind of aerobatics is knowing that this is not an aerobatic airplane. It was never designed for aerobatics. This was designed as a home-built commuter plane, and it does that phenomenally. And the reason I picked the plane for air shows is not because of its aerobatic capability. It's because of its look. It's very unique. It's very different. When you go to an air show, everybody wants a little bit of variety. They want, you got your skydivers that open up the show, and then you've got your unlimited aerobatic airplane. Sometimes you'll have some gliders, and you got your jets and everything else. And the Long Easy just fits into with that unique aircraft that brings a little bit more variety to shows. That being said, just about any airplane is capable of doing a loop and a roll, and you really have to respect the boundaries of the aircraft and fly within them. And when it comes to flying air shows with that Long Easy, it can be difficult, but it it's more than capable of the routine that I put it through. And then when we're out flying, we just have to be careful of that. And like he said, the knife edge, the rudders on the aircraft are fairly powerful because they're so far out. Like they do have quite a bit of pull, but it's very limited on how far it'll go. Like if you're straight and level and you stomp on the rudder all the way, it'll yaw the airplane a lot, but it loses effectiveness quickly, especially when trying to knife edge.
Elena has a question coming in the chat for you, Kyle. Elena's wondering, what does it feel like on takeoff? So many people have a very different airplane that they fly if they're into general aviation. So what's that feel like?
Taking off in this airplane is a little unique, and I'm sure Chops can attest to this, is that all your steering is done with your brakes. You don't really have any steering until you're going, you got a fair amount of speed, 50, 60 knots, and your rudders start to get a little bit of authority on you. But before that, it's all brakes. So as you're going down the runway, you're using your brakes to keep that nose straight. And another thing that's a little bit different is on a normal airplane, you wouldn't normally do this, but I guess it's full back on the stick, full power until the nose comes off the ground. And once the nose comes off the ground, you just kind of keep it. You can hold it and it'll eventually fly off, but you keep the nose off the ground until you hit about 80 knots. And then you just kind of pull it off nice and crisp. And it's a little different procedure. And as I explained in the video, one of the big differences with this airplane to a normal airplane is that the canard on the front wing, is lifting the nose up, where on a conventional airplane, the tail is pulling the tail down to make you go up. So everything's kind of backwards. The controls all work the same, but everything's a little backwards.
What do you think, Chops?
Yeah, I was trying to think through that. I'm glad you didn't ask me first what the takeoff experience was like, because it's A, going back a year, and B, taking off at Osh in a situation like that where it's so much chatter. Like, we briefed it, obviously, so what Kyle just said, I remember that is what I had to do. But anything he tried to say to me on the takeoff roll, I left it in the video because it's funny. You can literally see me just kind of sort of shaking my head like, I don't hear any of it, but I'm just going to do what I remember that we briefed. And the one thing I forgot was to raise the gear, right? And then you still had to yell it at me 3 times to like remember, oh yeah, gear, right? And then I cranked it the wrong, and I think I got it up, not all the way, right? And then number 2 told us your gear is still not quite up, and then I crank it the wrong way for a second to get it. Anyway, it's just a lot going on. So I think I remember it accelerated a lot. I remember it being a little bouncy until it got until I got the nose up, or until it raised aerodynamically, because I was holding the stick all the way back. And I do remember having to steer with brakes, but I didn't have to be told that. I just did it. I think that's an interesting, I think if you want to talk about, I don't have a lot of experience per se in terms of total hours, but I have flown a lot of types with my limited experience. And sort of the takeaway that I tell people is fundamentally all airplanes are the same, even when they're really different. But I have a short kind of feedback loop between what I put inputs and what I see them happen in the airplane, so I can quickly tie that together usually. So in this case, like the Chipmunk, for instance, it's an airplane I fly, which has an upside down mounted engine that rotates the other way. So everything about P factor that we've learned in North America about right rudder when you add power is not applicable in that airplane. And I remember on my first lesson in that airplane, the instructor told me, you're probably going to forget by the time you take off, but you got to give it left rudder, and I'm going to be there to help you if you forget, because it'll not go well if you give it right rudder when you try to take off like everyone does. It wasn't even a thing. And I remember climbing away, and he's like, hey, good job not forgetting about the rudder. And I was like, I forgot. I just did what it needed. I just gave it. I hit the throttle, felt it yaw the one way, gave it the pedal it needed. I think that's fundamentally my takeaway with flying a lot of types, is just don't overthink it. Just give it what it needs. And that typically is, and I think Kyle asked me, we're climbing, like, climb what feels comfortable in terms of the speed. And I was like, I've got it at a pitch that feels comfortable. And it turned out I was kind of at the right climb speed, because it just sort of felt like I could tell the controls were crisp. We were getting a good climb rate. I was like, I'm not really sure what I should be targeting. I'm just feeling it. It feels right.
How many different airplanes have you flown? I realize we probably can't get them all, but could you just start ticking off a list of all the things you've flown?
No, I mean, it's a lot. I'm lucky. I can't even, my logbook is a mess. I'm still kind of in the transition of trying to get it all digital. It's still not. So I can't even tell you my total time, because I've got paper log, digital log, and scrap notes from people that I've flown with. When I find out later, I could log that because they were a CFI, and this one you shouldn't log because he was just giving me a ride. And, it's over 50 types. Probably Long Easy goes in top 10 or top 5 of unique, maybe top 1, frankly, of unique, different. I mean, everything from Stearman to T6 to float planes to DC-3 to I've had time in a few different types of jets, which is cool. And as much as they're awesome, it does feel a lot more like a video game, flying a lot of like high performance stuff where an extra 300 is like a joke. I remember like my first time talking about going inverted in the extra 300, I kind of talked it through with the instructor. Like, okay, so I want to pitch up. And then he's like, just do it. You don't have to think at all. Like there's no energy management in the extra 300. You can literally, it's all like the wing is like a giant aileron. Basically, it goes right from the fuselage all the way to the tip. There's no flaps. You can literally, it's a cartoon, right? So as fun as those things are, it's also like super weird because you can't really apply. It's interesting because extra 300s are used a lot for upset recovery training for pilots. And I think it's a good thing to do for getting used to what it feels like to be completely disoriented and upside down and having all these strange forces if you tumble. But it's also not really applicable to how you would actually feel or recover in a regular GA airplane that got into a super weird attitude, because you would have to maintain energy management and you would have to think about accelerated stalls and so on. I mean, an extra 300 will accelerate a stall, but it'll also just power itself out of anything, almost any speed.
I'm glad you said that. We had another really interesting panel for those of you who are in your pilot journey somewhere, and you can find that on EAA's YouTube with Angle of Attack, Aviation 101, and Jason from the Finer Points. And listening to those 3 CFIs talk about how important that type of flying is to your safety as a pilot, I actually wrote it down on a piece of paper and I took notes. So that adds another perspective to that discussion, and I appreciate that. Kyle, I want to talk to you about how you got into aerobatics and aviation. You have a background that a lot of people will appreciate because you're mechanically minded. It's what you do from a day job perspective, and we have a lot of builders who are watching this.
Absolutely. So my background as far as work goes is I am an automotive mechanic. So my aircraft is a home built, and I take care of it. I've done 2 engine swaps and learned a lot about fiberglass. I didn't know much about fiberglass until I bought a plastic airplane. But my background, how I got into air shows is my dad flies air shows as well. Ken Fowler with Team Rocket. And I've been going to air shows for how long? Over 20 years now. He's been doing air shows for 22 years. When I was a kid, I used to announce his air show. And I knew that when I grew up, I wanted to fly air shows as well. And I also remember when I was a kid that I thought the Long Easy was the funniest / coolest looking airplane. And one day I'm going to buy one of those and fly air shows. And that's exactly what I did eventually.
When you had Burt Rutan sign it, tell me about that moment.
That was pretty exciting. That was one of the most interesting people I have ever met. And it was an honor to meet him. A little nerve-wracking, and I'm not usually nervous when I meet people. And I wasn't too bad when I met him. When I talked to him about it, he told me a little history on the Easies and all the variations that came along before it. And I told him that I flew air shows in my little Long Easy, and I asked him to sign it, and he obviously came over and signed it. We chatted for a bit, which was really nice. And then he looked at me with a smirk on his face, and he said, these things were never approved for aerobatics. I'm like, well, I know that your brother did aerobatics in them, so I know that I can do it. And he just kind of laughed it off. And I mean, he's an idol of mine. I definitely look up to him. But I mean, whether I get his approval or not, the fact I got a little chuckle out of him, I'm more than happy with that.
Fantastic, just given the way that he has reshaped how we think about what a wing can do. Chops, I want to talk to you about your background. You came to this, as we talked about a little bit earlier, from a filmmaking perspective. And when I hear you describe editing and taking the easy edit over the one that you want to really kind of massage, as someone who has a television news background, I appreciate that. Tell me about your background and how you got into aviation.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I always knew I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I always knew I wanted to be a pilot. I also always knew I couldn't be a pilot as a job. I just knew that wasn't the thing. I wanted to fly for fun, and no disrespect to military and commercial pilots. That's just too hard. I'm not that guy. I'm not. And I mean, film industry was hard for the hours and so on, but it was different. You could still show up, like roll out of bed and just get on set and shake it off and go for a 16-hour day or whatever. But flying, I just am not that guy to like be sharp and ready to go at 5 a.m. or whatever and go whenever you have to go, wherever you have to go. I just always knew I wanted to be a pilot. My grandfather flew Spitfires. That's what I looked at as a kid as the icon of an airplane, and just kind of wanted to do it separately from being an artist and wanting to be a filmmaker. So it really took me all my life to I started flying as I think I was 21. It was between first and second year of film school, and I was kind of in the student mindset and had a little bit of money to just treat it as an extra course. And that's kind of what I did. Got the private license at that time. And then sort of really that was in the mid 90s. And then kind of throughout the next 20 years, I just kind of worked as a filmmaker and a private pilot. And then finally the technology and the world existed to merge the two. I had kind of been a little bit disillusioned with what happened to television, and like from the year 2000 onward, things really changed quickly. A lot of things conspired against sort of the art side of it and made it really easy to mass produce reality. Like the genre of reality TV was born in that time around 2001. There was an actor's strike and a writer's strike at the same time. And the producer, Mark Burnett, was very smart. And he was like, what can I do without actors and producers or actors and writers? And it was Survivor, the first reality TV show, which just exploded. And that changed everything. It was the same time as digital video was easily accessible. You could throw 20 camera guys at a show with digital video, and they would come home with like piles of footage, and then you would just throw an army of editors at it and find it later. It was the idea of action and roll and cut. Those terms are still used, but the idea of film being measured in footage is just hilarious. Like, it's not a thing anymore. It's data. And they just throw data at the problem. And as a cinematographer, the idea of lighting artistically kind of went out the window. It was like, there's 20 camera guys, just get it. The exposure will be fine. We'll fix it in post. Like, you'd hear fix it in post all the time. So being able to kind of move toward making content that I just wanted to see was how my channel was born. I didn't care about revenue streams. I just wanted to make some content that I wanted to see. I didn't feel like there was good flying content available. I wanted to make it real, actually real content, not focused on sort of reality TV drama. And that was kind of how it went. So it was really authentic and organic, the way I kind of just made a thing I wanted to see and didn't care if it worked.
And obviously it is working. I'll come back to you here in a minute because I do want to talk about growing an audience and fans and subscribers. I think your approach is really interesting, and you've had success to the tune of hundreds of thousands of YouTube subscribers. But Kyle, I want to talk to you. So you heard Chops talk about the Spitfire, that is his plane, that he would that is very, very close to his heart. What is an aircraft that you want to fly? What is your kind of brass ring?
The long easy.
Nice.
No, you have to pick something. No, you have to pick something you don't already fly.
Oh God, if I had to pick something I don't already fly, I don't know if I could pick a single airplane. I mean, there's a whole list of warbirds I would love to fly, and I'm sure one day I might get the opportunity. But there's also a whole list of home builds that I would love to fly. The difference is that with a warbird is that they're extremely valuable and difficult to get your hands on to fly. And then the maintenance on them, and I'm a mechanic, but I'm not a very good mechanic. I don't like getting dirty and oily, and that's what warbirds are all about. But with home builds, it's gas and go. It's so much fun. I really do love the home built world, and that is my preferred plane, preferably with more power. But even still, I mean, everything in the home built world, whether it's an RV, which is, Vans has built just such an amazing lineup of aircraft, or like a Super Cub to go out backcountry flying. I could not pick a single airplane that I would want to fly. I'm sure there's a few warbirds I could definitely list off, but I don't think I could pinpoint one. I love aviation, no matter what it is.
Your wingman, Home 409 in the chat, upset that you did not mention the F1 rocket by name. Chops, my question to you,
the one that had
you do
power.
have the one that had to pull power. You heard it here and
Yeah.
in the video forever. Chops, I want to ask you, you've got a lot of warbird experience, and given your grandfather's legacy, warbirds are very, very near and dear to your heart. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I guess getting back to the idea of jet fighters and so on, they're awesome, but I feel like that is in an era where the human is a liability to the machine. Like the bag of meat is slowing down the machine, basically, right? But warbirds in that era was when man and machine reached their, like, they both needed each other. Like a warbird can't do anything without the human on board, and the warbird can't quite outperform the human. I mean, it can in a dive, you can pull 9Gs and black yourself out or whatever, but that was the place where human and machine were perfectly merged in aviation, in my opinion, with warbirds hitting that point of like incredible performance, awesome power, but this machine that has these knobs and dials and buttons and levers, and you're operating a tractor. Like, I mean, it's just a monster. And if you got to know what you're doing, and it doesn't help you with any of it, right? I mean, none of it. There's nothing automatic. There's nothing that's not manual. You know, it's all just like cranks and valves and dealing with hydraulic systems or whatever you're managing. And that to me was this perfect blend of like, yeah, that is stick and rudder flying to me. And yeah, they're not as accessible. I got really lucky that there's a museum that's not too far from me that I was able to do a bunch of my basic training, and I have access to a T6 on a regular basis, which I'm just that blows me away. That's probably what, like, I get to be a 5-year-old and hold the wheel and a lot of really cool things for a minute. Some more often, like sometimes I get more controls than the other guy has, like with Kyle. But a lot of the time, let's be honest, I'm a 5-year-old holding the wheel. But what I got to do there is legit get my T6 checkout and fly that airplane solo and stay current in it. And I'm part of the crew there. That is the stepping stone. If you want to fly Mustangs or Spitfires, you cannot show up without T6 time. And usually they want to see like 50 plus hours in a T6 before they'll talk to you about flying anything like that. And I'm lucky that I'm in that position, which isn't a lot of time, but it's a lot of time compared to what most GA pilots would ever in their life get access to. So that has been, and it's helped me with so much, because I mean, that airplane is such a monster to fly. It's a 6,000 pound tail dragger. You just really have to be on it. And it's helped a lot with my stick and rudder and just managing systems. Like I got my multi-engine rating shortly after doing my T6 checkout, and the systems management side of flying the multi was just not a problem because of how much I had to deal with in the T6, just managing not over boosting and all this stuff with the constant speed prop and the retractable gear and everything else. So I forget what the original question was, but warbirds, awesome.
That was basically the original question, and a very, very good answer for it. I think that I feel like the Spitfire is going to happen for you. How do you view that?
Yeah, I think it's going to happen. I mean, I'm definitely building my time to get there prepared. I've had offers to go for rides and I've declined. It's like, I don't want to ride. Like, I want to show up prepared, get in the proper seat, and get the checkout. I want to leave checked out in a Spitfire. I don't need to solo it. I think that's, you know, like going back to what Kyle said about the rarity and the value of these things. Like, I don't need to be the guy that bent a Spitfire. I'm pretty sure I won't kill myself in it, but I just don't need to be the guy that bent one. And I think the pressure of soloing it would be too much, but whatever. We'll get to that later. I wouldn't have said 5 years ago I'd be a solo T6 pilot either. So who the hell knows? But just to be able to, like, you know, just pay homage to my grandfather and check out in the Spitfire is the goal. And then continue flying the T6 on a regular basis I've had Spitfire pilots tell me that they're scared of the T6. Like, they have to do their yearly checkouts in the T6 and they go back to the Spitfire, which is like just smooth and it's a dream. The hardest part about it is the big long nose makes it kind of like landing a T6 more from the back seat, just because you have less visibility. And you do have to kind of 3-point it because you can't really wheel land it because the nose is long and the prop might strike. So they don't really wheel land Spitfires. But yeah, we're trained to wheel end or 3-point the T6. And I do feel like I'll show up prepared when I get that opportunity. That's the goal. Yeah.
You will, and I am so excited to see it. So you talked about solos in different capacities. I want to go back to your very first solo story, which for everyone who is either a pilot who wants to be a pilot or someone who already is. Kyle, let's start with you. How old were you when you soloed? What did you solo in, and how did you do?
My first solo was in 172, and I did okay. I was 21, I believe. You're making me think a lot harder than I should have to on this. I don't think about this too often because I don't look back at Cessna too much. yeah, I was about 20, 21, around that age. I was working like 14 or 16-hour days on a pipeline up in middle of nowhere. And Eric Hansen at Team Rocket, the guy who flies with my dad, it was my flight instructor. And every day after work, I'd run to the airport as fast as I could for the last hour of daylight of the day, fly an hour in the 172, and then eventually I did my solo there with Eric Hansen,
who is part of Team Rocket. What does it mean to be in an industry where your dad is flying as an aerobatic pilot and you are as well? I know you guys are super close. What is that experience like?
You know what? It's a fun experience. I love flying air shows with my dad. I absolutely do. We both have different ideas of how we should be going about the air show business. And we both do our own things, but when I get the opportunity to fly shows with my dad, which is not as often as I like, I absolutely love it. Last year, I got to actually fly formation for the first time at a show with my dad in 2 long easies. We even got the Wall of Fire, and it was up in Quesnel, BC. And that was a pretty special moment. It was pretty fun. My dad broke my airplane the day before, just because he didn't know how to operate the landing gear quite right, and I spent all night fixing my airplane. But regardless, it was a very very fond memory that I'll never forget. And like I said, love flying air shows with my dad. It's turning into the family business, and possibly one day my kids will drive me crazy like I drove my dad crazy and get into air shows too.
I love that the landing gear keeps coming up. You definitely have to check out FlightChops video, because you can see it as he's like, oh, gear, like, and then, it was this. So, and to your point, that the gear is something you have to think about in the long easy in a way that you don't in other airplanes. Chops, my question to you is, what was your very first solo and how did you do?
So my first solo was a Schweitzer 233 glider, and cheers to Kyle for doing it when we were 21. I definitely remember thinking I was old. Like, I felt like I missed the boat. This is my lifelong dream that I want to do since I was 5, and it took me till I was 21 to get started. It's funny looking back now, like, good God, imagine not having started then. It's only a few years later than I could have, but I put myself under a lot of pressure because I was a broke student, and started with soaring in the summer, got solo, and then moved on to power and just raced through the training and tried to do everything in minimums, which I managed to do, but it wasn't enjoyable. So my biggest advice to people is embrace and enjoy the training and enjoy the journey. It'll be hard. There'll be days you think you suck, but that first solo is a thing that no one can, you're in a new club. Once you do that, it's a thing. And, that airplane, if you notice, I should have included a picture of it. I forgot to think of that, but it looks like it shouldn't really fly. Like, they're just not, it's kind of amazing that they can glide, frankly. But they're really great basic trainers. And I did a bunch of solo flying that summer. And the story that I remember the most about that summer is the time on a Saturday when I managed to keep it up for like 2 hours, and I only came down because I had to pee. And then the Sunday, I went back to the club. It was the same kind of a day, but I launched a little bit later, and I was still not on top of my meteorology as much as I am now. But that thing happened where the cumulus clouds kind of cycle. You know how that happens when you see the bottoms drop out, Kyle, and like the thermals. So we also paid in 500-foot increments for the tow. So usually they would dump you off at 2,000 feet. But at 1,500 feet, I felt a thermal, so I dumped off, which I had done the day before, stayed up for 2 hours. And on that Sunday afternoon, as the thermals were kind of dying, I struggled for like half an hour at 1,500 feet, trying. And I didn't descend, but I also didn't climb. And it became clear I'm not getting to like the other day, I was up at 6,000 feet. It was like, I felt invincible. And there I was at 1,500 feet, suddenly realizing I'm like 5 miles away from the field. I'm not making it back. And that moment of absolute terror when I was like, what do I do? Stop. This incredible calm came over me when I just kicked into my training. I just picked a field, went through the process, made the radio call to the base to say I'm not making it back. Here's approximately where I am. Then I stopped listening to the radio once I knew they heard me, and I just did my procedure. Saw a field that had like a perpendicular dark patch in it. So I thought that looks like it might be a ditch. I'm going to touch down right after that, which I did. I remember watching it go by just as I touched, felt the grass, and turned out to be like one of the best landings I've ever done. And the tow plane actually came by with another pilot on board and landed. He did a bunch of passes and he landed the same field to say, good choice. Do you want to fly it out? And I was like, no, I don't. I'm done. And I looked at the windshield, and I saw the spit on the windshield from when I was yelling at myself before, like, stupid, stupid, before I made the decision to just go into my training and completely calm down. But then, of course, after landing, I was completely shaking, because I was like, that could have been bad. Like, I'm a student pilot. I should not have put myself in a position to be landing out. And at the club that we were at, they had a rule where if you did that, they would send a truck and guys would take it apart and put on a trailer, and then you owed everybody beer and steaks that night, because that was the deal. Like, you just ruined everyone's day. But because the tow pilot saved me, by the time the truck got there, they were gone. They'd already flown it out, and I was like standing in this field by myself, and the truck came, and they're like, you are lucky. You picked a good field, and we didn't have to take the plane apart. But so that's kind of I was so inexperienced at that time. Like, thinking back, I'm like, I can't believe I was that cocky to like put myself in that position. I don't even know how many hours solo I had, maybe 3 at that time. But it's just funny how much you grow and learn as a pilot, and how much of it is about knowing yourself, and knowing the training really comes back when it needs to.
That's an incredible story. Wow. Kyle, what advice would you give for folks who are interested in pursuing a path in aviation?
Depending on what path you choose, I mean, it's definitely life altering. Going back to what Steve was saying earlier about getting your license in the first place, I don't think people quite understand what it means once you have a pilot's license. Once you have that license, that is a newfound freedom. It's just like when you were 16 years old or 18 years old when you first got your driver's license, right? And you could finally get away from mom and dad's house, and nothing was stopping you. There's no more barriers. It's just like that all over again, except instead of driving a half hour or something like that to go to the city or go to a bar or whatever it may be, now you're driving or flying a half hour or an hour to go to another city, to another state, to, if you're close to Canada or the US, and you go into another country. It really is a newfound freedom. And I really think that anybody who wants to pursue it, you'll never be disappointed in the choice to get a pilot's license. I put mine off till I was 21, which I thought was too long. I started my license when I was 14, actually, and then I got a girlfriend, and those things cost money as well. And I had to choose airplane or girlfriend. And when I was 14, I thought I made the right choice. But then I had to wait till I was 21 to get my pilot's license.
I have a question coming in on the chat from Victor. Victor wants to know, how does the wall of fire work? Which we know, you and I know, because of what we do with air shows.
Absolutely.
But for someone sitting on the ground, walk them through the process here.
So the wall of fire is basically just a whole bunch of gasoline. There's a few different ways to do it, and I may mess this up. And if there's any pyro people listening, I'm sorry, but some people will use like PCV pipe and fill it with gasoline, or sometimes they'll use like 4-liter milk jugs or 1-gallon milk jugs, I guess. And then you wrap some det cord around it. It all gets hooked up to a circuit board, and everybody's in radio communication, the people on the ground, the people on the plane, and we call our dive in, and we all brief it beforehand that on this pass, after this maneuver, that we will do the wall of fire. So we set up so that we're not right over top of the wall of fire. We don't want to get burnt and crispy, so that we're just inside the wall of fire, nice and close. And as we go by, there's the picture there, they set off the det cord, and it blows up all the gasoline, and that creates the wall of fire.
I have one more question for the both of you before we wrap it up. And Kyle, I will start with you. What does EAA AirVenture mean to you?
EAA AirVenture, that I should have asked Chops that first. I could have thought a little bit. That there
I'm thinking the same thing. I'm glad I'm second.
You're welcome. I'll take the hit first. EAA AirVenture is, I mean, people say Disney World's the happiest place on earth, but I think EAA is for adults, or at least pilots at least. That is a place where people of all walks of aviation, whether it be home-built, ultralight, glider, parachute, jet, warbird, everybody can convene in one location, and we get to share all of our information, share all of our experiences, all of our stories that we have to tell. We can listen to some of the people who have made mistakes and try to learn from them, or tell them of the mistakes that we've recently made. And it's just a place where all these like-minded people, we had, what was it, 640,000 people last year for the week? So all those people all in one location to share their passion of aviation. And it's such a wealth of information for people to go there and learn what they can. And it really preserves the spirit of general aviation, EAA, Experimental Aviation Association. I mean, that's what we want people to remember. That's what I want people to remember, is the spirit of general aviation.
Chops, in the remaining 2 minutes, what does EAA AirVenture mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, it was always something I knew was like the holy grail. I didn't get there until 98. It was the first year I'd had my license for a couple of years, and I rented a plane with a couple of friends and flew down and did the quintessential camp under the wing thing. So going in kind of not fully understanding what it was, but knowing it was a big aviation thing was pretty cool as like whatever, a 23-year-old or however old I was then. And my biggest memory is interesting. EAA shared the picture of Bob Hoover from 98 doing the strike commander routine, the power off routine. I was there, and seeing that picture was kind of emotional, like realizing like my eyeballs as a 23-year-old were on that plane in 98 in that picture that EAA just shared. And it was interesting because there's jets and there's all the aerobatic things and all this colorful, flashy airplanes. And suddenly this twin, kind of boring looking business class twin. I mean, that's what it is. It's a turboprop, I think, or is it a piston? I don't know, but does not look like an exciting airplane. Taxis out, and I was like, what is that? Like, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what the airplane was. And anyone that has not seen that demo, just as soon as this is over, go Google like Bob Hoover power off, whatever. I don't know, what is it called? The power off energy management routine or something in the strike commander. He proceeds to go and fly that airplane and does everything. You can't even imagine, all these aerobatics, but then he shuts down both engines and you just hear it whistle by, and he gets down low real fast, whistling by with both props feathered, and then proceeds to continue to do a whole bunch of aerobatics, which is unbelievable. And he doesn't turn the engines back on. He comes back in and lands. But what blew my mind was that it taxied and then turns into show center taxiway, and then it's still moving, and the door opens. He gets out to like wave his hat. And I think this airplane is kind of big enough that you can't be opening the door and still reaching controls. He is so good at the energy management that he just got out and just like waves his hat, and the airplane stopped rolling like on the line. I mean, it was surreal. And to see that in the crowd, in the scene that is what AirVenture is, that I'm so glad that was my first experience of it. It really captured the magic of what it is. It's just unbelievable. It's aviation. Yeah.
Aviation at its finest, for sure. Gentlemen, I am so appreciative of your time today. Kyle, you mentioned Loco, by the way. We've got up next what we're calling internally we're calling it the Has-Been panel, but it's also a Flashback Friday panel. It is all your former favorite demo pilots, and some of them will be in the chat. So do stick around on the stream for that. We are out of time. For everyone who has been watching this EAA Spirit of Aviation Week content as part of our broader EAA Together initiative, we thank you. And gentlemen, my friends, I thank you as well. I can't wait to see you in person again. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for having us.
All right. Take care, everyone. We're back in a bit.
Spirit of Aviation Week streaming is brought to you through the generous support of Dynon Avionics. Learn why more than 20,000 pilots already fly behind Dynon at dynon.aero.
In a world of ancient avionics, one Seattle company is breaking all the rules. Now in airplanes everywhere, coming soon to your